They pay a guy who's a Russian spy who's the source of the dossier. The other source of the dossier is Charles Dolan, who meets with that guy on a park bench in Arlington, and they don't want to interview him. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But that's what Comey's FBI did.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined by Jeff Berkowitz in Public Affairs Television out of Chicago. And Jeff, we're going to be talking about some of the big stories of the week. One of the overarching themes that's been going on in Washington, impacting the presidential campaign of next year, is scandal. And yesterday, John Durham, who wrote the Durham Report, testified before the House Judiciary Committee. We're going to have more of his testimony. But Jeff, you took a look at some of the activities that happened yesterday. What is your take on what came out of the House hearing?
Well, this is a precursor to many scandals, perhaps, that we'll be discussing over the summer and up to the presidential election of November 24. Excuse me, yes, November 24. Look, this was all about the allegations that the FBI essentially didn't do its job. Starting in at least August of 2016, they just got information that they took without investigating, without doing any of the standard practices for which the FBI is known as being one of the greatest or best investigatory organizations in the world. That's the image it's supposed to have. Instead, in short, Hillary Clinton campaign fed information essentially about a trumped up, pun intended, trumped up charge of Trump collusion with Russia when she was going to be, in a sense, colluding with Russia or her campaign. And the bit that came out yesterday, sort of, I mean, wasn't as prominent as it should have been, we'll make it more prominent, was that in early August of 2016, Brennan goes into the Obama administration, basically, I think, with Obama, with Attorney General Holder, and basically spills the beans of what I've just said. And instead of these guys saying, okay, we control the FBI and Brennan's here, let's get this, let's sort of like look at the Clinton administration.
Let's back up some, because just so people have the context, we all kind of forget what we all knew just a couple of years ago. We had the 2016 presidential election, which Trump won. What happened during the course of that election and into the Trump presidency was the narrative put forth by many in the Democratic Party that Trump had won, which was a shock to everyone, that he had won because of Russians colluding with Trump, and that Trump was controlled by Putin. That was the narrative. And so that manifested itself in a variety of ways, including the Mueller report. Mueller was a former FBI director, and he took 2 years to investigate this. And then at the end of the Mueller report, he came out and said there's no evidence of Trump colluding with the Russians. So as a background. Now, what Jeff was just talking about, ladies and gentlemen, and is shocking, is that all of that, the 2 years of the Mueller report, all of this narrative that plagued the Trump campaign and then the Trump presidency for the early, first couple of years of that, all of that was known by many people in the Democratic Party, the political leaders, to have been a wrong narrative. They knew early on, and here's the evidence from the Durham report that Jeff just alluded to, that on the August the 3rd, 2016, we had a briefing by the CIA director, John Brennan, and as you look down in the highlighted part, according to Brennan, handwritten notes, Brennan reflected in the meeting to the participants that including the president, the vice president, the attorney general, and FBI director Comey, he briefed them on the alleged approval by Hillary Clinton of a proposal by one of her campaign aides to vilify Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by the Russian security services. So Hillary Clinton did this as part of her campaign to win the presidency, to stir up this scandal, this lie that she wasn't going to come out and say, but they were going to plant this narrative. And so this went out, and the reason she was doing that was because at the time, as you recall, she had been subpoenaed for her 30,000 emails. She was being vilified because she had put a server in her own home, and that people were saying that could have been tapped into by foreign sources. And so she was trying to create a scandal to offset her own scandal relative to the emails at that time. So we have to lay that, bring people back to the context of what was going on in the world back then. So Durham was then reported at the end of the Trump presidency in November of 2020. The Attorney General, then William Barr, appointed Durham to do an investigation into how did this come out, how was it so mishandled, what was the FBI doing, and a lot of this is what came out of the Durham report was that the FBI basically had just blown their investigation, and apparently we're not really trying to get to the bottom of it.
No, and to a bit of balance here, the Trump campaign, right around the same time, I think the date is August 16th, had a meeting which kind of played into the hands of the Clinton campaign's strategy, as you just laid out, Terry. That is, they had this meeting in Trump Tower with various people from the Trump campaign with some Russians. And purportedly, it said this was to deal with some adoption issues of adopting Russian kids, etc. I think Americans adopting. We won't go into all that. Some said because it was about the Trump campaign being approached by some Russians or others and saying, would they be interested in some dirt that had been dug up on the Clinton campaign? And apparently they said yes, and that was, according to some, the reason for this meeting. So it's kind of interesting that these two things went on right around the same time. The August 3 briefing that you just discussed, Terry, by Brennan of the Obama administration, which apparently included the president, Barack Obama, his attorney general, and others, and this August 16th meeting. And much of those two things, Terry, in one sense, played out over the next 4 years.
But you know, Jeff, here's the thing, not to lose track of. I always try to keep my eye, keep in mind, let's not lose the forest for the trees, right? The fact that, as I showed you in this document from the Durham campaign, the fact is the president, the vice president, then Biden, and others, including the FBI director, were all briefed that this was a scandal cooked up by the Hillary Clinton campaign. And they sat on it. They didn't come out and go, wait a minute, we don't need a Mueller report. They could have had a press conference and say, look, the election's over, but Hillary Clinton did this. It's a fabrication. There's nothing to it. And they could have allowed the president of the United States, Donald Trump, to be going on with his administration for the American people without all the interference of him having to deal, with these allegations. And we might also add that Adam Schiff, who was then the House chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and Schiff at that time came out and lied to the press, lied to the American people. He said, I have words to the effect that there is concrete evidence tying Trump to the Russians. I can't release it now, it's classified, but there's no question that Trump was guilty of working with the Russians. That's what he said. He lied, and yesterday, in the House of Representatives, he was censored. He was only the 26th House member in the history of the United States to be censored. Let's just take real quick a little brief look at that.
By its adoption of House Resolution 521, the House has resolved that the House of Representatives censures Adam Schiff, representative of the 30th Congressional District of California, for misleading the American public and and for conduct unbecoming of an elected member of the House of Representatives, that Representative Adam Schiff will be forthwith present himself in the well of the House of Representatives for the pronouncement of censure.
Well, there you have it. I mean, Adam Schiff, as you just said, was censured. I think he's only the 26th U.S. representative to be censured in the history of this country. So, in the words of, in the words of Joe Biden, it's a big F deal. Okay, really. And the Democrats, it was along party lines. And the Republicans only have a margin of, what is it, 4 or 5 votes. Some people on both sides were absent. Margin was 4 or 5 votes. They'll play this down. The big thing is, this was sort of the icing on the cake, but there's not going to be much coming out of yesterday's testimony by Durham, not because it wasn't important testimony, but because the Republicans putting forth this didn't have the time, the resources to put on the kind of show in primetime TV that we saw the Democrats do with the January 6th investigation. And so it's not necessarily critical. They did what they could do, but number one, it was not well covered, even by Fox and by which you would think would be covering it more. They did have the cameras going for much, but not all of the 5 hours of testimony.
Well, again, it's 5
CNN
hours.
had some.
But yeah.
Well, but my point is, what people saw of the January 6th investigation, the so-called insurrection investigation about Trump, what they saw at the end of that whole thing was primetime TV, essentially put on by a producer, Terry.
I don't want to spend too much time on January.
Well, I don't want to
The-
spend.
the- the point is,
flag that.
look, the
Flag
people.
that.
All right,
Yeah,
whatever.
go ahead.
The point is, if you want to talk about media, the thing is that we have an indictment of the journalism going on at the 3 major networks, who seemingly have a policy of ignoring any coverage of anything that might be negative to Biden, because there's a whole series. I'm not going to go on and on. There's a whole series of events that have happened, and the networks have not covered it at all. It's shameful. But yesterday,
Well, let's go back.
Yesterday,
Oh, I'm
I want
sorry,
to get
let's-
to this
go ahead,
bite by
sorry, I cut you off.
John Durham yesterday, because one of the things that came out from his report was really an indictment of the FBI. And as I said a number of times already about how the FBI director at the time, James Comey, had been briefed that this was a trumped-up scandal by Hillary Clinton. Comey went ahead anyway and went to the FISA courts. That's a court, the special court to get permission to spy basically on foreign intelligence people, so we can find out what some of our adversaries might be saying. But the FBI lied to the FISA court. They hid exculpatory evidence, evidence that would have shown that some of the people under allegations were in fact innocent. The FBI hid that. So with that setup, here's what John Durham said in a back and forth with one of the House members.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without any significant review of its own intelligence database?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without interviewing the essential witnesses?
Yes.
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without using any of the standard analytical tools typically employed in evaluating intelligence?
Yes.
Why and under what motivation would a prosecutorial agency act in such a way where it willfully ignores multiple instances of exculpatory evidence throughout the course of its investigation?
There appear to be persons in the FBI that had rather strong views concerning then candidate Trump.
If either you or someone on your team willfully ignored exculpatory evidence, refused to interview key witnesses, favored one suspect over another, or did any or all of the things that the FBI did during Crossfire Hurricane, would you face repercussions?
There ought to be repercussions. If that ever happened in connection with an agent that I was working with and I knew about it, the first thing would be to report it to the court. Probably second thing would be to report it to their superiors. The third thing would be sure that that agent never worked with me again.
So there you go, really an indictment of the FBI. And I want to say as a follow-up to that, we are at a point now where the Congress, many members of the Congress are saying the FBI director, the new FBI director, Christopher Wray, should be fired. Also, we should note that the FBI director has testified before the budget committees. He's asking for $1 billion to build a new FBI headquarters, and the House of Representatives that controls the purse strings are all of the Republicans are like, there's no way we're going to give you this money. They also have to, this year, renew the FISA law. And again, that's where I just said where the former FBI director had lied to the FISA court, saying they had evidence that there was collusion with Trump and the Russians so that the FBI could spy on the Trump campaign and then the Trump presidency. The Republicans are remembering that. That's another significant policy change that people should look for, that they're going to be rewriting the FISA law that has to be renewed before the end of the year.
Well, there has to be more oversight of the FBI, and that'll tie in with the either renewal or reform of the FISA courts. Clearly, there was not correct oversight there when the FBI lied to the FISA court. FISA court didn't pick that up initially, and so much bad ensued from that. So we need structural reforms, and that should have been what the hearing on the Durham testimony was yesterday. It wasn't. The Democrats, in short, played that as, look, there were no prosecutions or indictments, or very few, and no convictions coming out of your work, Mr. Durham, so it was a waste of time. Mueller had indictments and convictions, so it was better. And they completely ignored the point you just made about the reforms and about the many failures of the FBI. But that's the way it is. Sometimes things get through to the public, sometimes they don't. The good news is we still have 18 months or so until the presidential election, and this could be a big issue, along, Terry, to be fair, with the other scandals. You know, the January 6th investigation.
Well, and
that's
as we
coming
said
up,
off the end,
the declassified documents, the indictment of the first indictment of a president. These scandals will all be going back and forth, and maybe we can just shift a little bit to just mention that this is in the midst of the GOP primary and presidential primary. And one recent poll by CNN has
it's
things
also
narrowing.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say
So
we
it
should
has-
also
this-
mention
I'll
there is
say-
a Democratic. Biden's not going to. Biden's trying to ignore his opposition, but
I'll bring that up.
He
Let me
has
just
some,
bring it up in context.
and Biden, of
Let me
course,
just-
has his
Terry,
own scandals.
Let me just bring it up in context. So all I was going to say is that poll is perhaps important. It's only one poll, but it shows Trump at 47%, which is lower than he's been, and it shows DeSantis as 26, which is higher. That's still a big lead, and everybody else is in single digits. What you were about, I think, to point out is Biden appears to many as increasingly unlikely to be the nominee of the Democratic Party, partly because of his incapacity, we'll put it, his age, and his unpopularity. So
And the
as you pointed
allegations
out,
of his corruption.
right, which we'll try to get to here in the next few minutes. But because of all those things, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, J.B. Pritzker, the governor we know here in Illinois, are two of the likely candidates if something goes wrong with Biden and he can't be or won't be the nominee. They will be vying for the Democratic nomination.
If people
So
watch
all
our
I'm saying
show,
is-
I have said
Go ahead.
over the last couple shows that we did that I don't believe Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee. I think he is just so obviously flawed. And I have heard over the last number of weeks that more and more people are saying this on some of the other news shows. And of course, as you just mentioned, we just had Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who I would say at this point, if someone was going to replace Biden, it would be probably on the Democratic ticket, it would probably be Gavin Newsom. I sat down with an interview with Sean Hannity. We don't have a clip from that, but Hannity asked Newsom, how often does your phone ring from Democrats around the country begging you to get into the race? He didn't answer, but it was obvious that it was happening probably on a fairly consistent basis. So I think there's a real groundswell. I just got to say, politics aside, the Democrats don't want to lose. And they're looking at this 80-year-old man who is increasingly showing his frailties and increasingly the allegations coming out that are going to weaken him. Jeff, you and I, speaking of age, are of an age where we remember 50 years ago. It was the summer of 1973. It was the summer of Watergate. And we had the Watergate hearings, which gripped the attention of the American public. And everyone who went through that remembers John Dean testifying what was going on behind the scenes. It's possible. I don't know if we'll have the summer of the Biden scandals, the Biden bribery scandals. We may, but I think this is all coming. We have now the Republican House Oversight Committee. There's increasingly information coming out about that. We just had yesterday, there was a settlement with Hunter Biden where he basically escaped a gun. He got a slap on the wrist about a gun violation. There were other things, and basically Hunter's walking away, and this is another thing where it's going to be an issue where people increasingly are just talking about the injustice in the Justice Department and how we have a two-tier system. We have one system of justice for the average person, and that the politically connected, well, they get another system of justice.
We'll just spend a minute or two on that, and then we'll go over to the bribery issue, which is all the time we probably have left. But you've just mentioned the Hunter Biden, son of Joe Biden, plea deal, and that's coming up. We're taping this on June 22nd. Just in the last few days, the hearing for that plea deal has been set for July 26th before a judge by the name of Mary Ellen Nareka, okay, something like that. But in any case, the main thing is she happens to be a Trump appointee. She will have to approve, as a standard practice, the plea deal. If she doesn't accept it, well, then they go back to the drawing boards. Almost always these plea deals in this type of situation are accepted, but still there'll be some publicity about it. And the short of, as you said, it was a slap on the wrist because he didn't file his tax returns way back 6 or 7 years ago when he was making, I think, a total of $1.5 million. So he's going to pay a fine, I think, of $100,000, and it's going to be, these are misdemeanors he's pleading guilty to, not felonies on the tax evasion or failure to report charge. And I think the gun deal was that he, I think, lied on an application, which is kind of interesting. Well, the Democrats, well, I won't even go into, it's kind of interesting. He lied on an application, I guess, to get a gun, and I think he didn't report.
Well, I think it was that he
health
had been
issues?
convicted of a drug charge,
Right.
which was supposed to prohibit him from getting a gun, but he lied about that.
And what he'll get as a result of that apparently is
I believe it's probation.
a
isn't it?
diversion. They call it a diversion. So instead of getting time or in jail or anything of that type, diversion. He'll have to go through a drug substance program. He's blaming a lot of this whole mess on his drug substance abuses. And that's the end of that if that happens on July 26th.
And other people
But
have gone
no-
to jail for that. There are people who are serving time in jail right now for violating the very same thing. So,
but
as Congressman Jordan said in a hearing yesterday, the reason that people think there is a two-tiered justice system is because there is. That was a quote by Jim Jordan yesterday in the House.
especially with reference to Hillary Clinton compared to how she handled her documents compared to Donald Trump. But moving along, because we only have a few minutes left, the bigger issue people should be focusing on are these bribery allegations about President Joe Biden and his family relating to Ukraine money, relating to China money, millions of dollars. And that investigation is ongoing by the Comer Committee, Oversight Committee, and perhaps other committees.
And
in
again,
the US
shocking,
Congress.
this was a hearing, I'm going to show a clip of a hearing that the House Oversight Committee had. We'll play just about a minute of it. What's shocking, by the way, and shameful, I would say, of the news networks, they did not cover this hearing, folks. This is another reason why you should be listening to this program. And by the way, before we forget at the end, give us your comments of what you think about what we talked about. And if you haven't already subscribed, we hope you do. With that, let me play, Jeff, part of this hearing for about 1 minute.
Hunter Biden's representatives claimed the money was, quote, good faith seed funds, but could not explain why those funds had to go through an intermediary in what appears to be an attempt to hide the transfers from the Chinese. They also couldn't explain why the Bidens received over $1 million in 16 different wire transfers over a period of 3 months to at least 5 different banks. The president, when confronted with this information, said it wasn't true. Instead of being honest with the American people, President Biden has claimed since the 2020 election that his family has not received money from China. That was a lie in 2020, and he continues to lie to the American people now. The Bidens have received millions of dollars from China. It is inconceivable that the president did not know it.
Concealment.
So there you go, folks. That was the House Oversight Committee members talking about the Biden thing. And Jeff, I think a lot of people, I've talked to some of my Democratic friends, they think this is all a right-wing fantasy. But when they're talking about we know now where the LLCs are, limited liability corporations, we know the bank records. It seems to me they've got some hard evidence. And as I said about the summer of Watergate, we might have the summer of the Biden bribery scandal, because I think this is increasingly going to bubble up. I'll insert that in August, typically, the Congress goes away for a month. So that would help Biden out. But we'll have to see where this goes.
Well, and this is going to play out again in the context of the GOP presidential primary and perhaps of the general election in November of 2024, because China is becoming an increasingly important issue in that election. Who is dealing with China well, if anybody who has dealt with China well, because we've just seen the president's you've just seen the president and his Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who was in China dealing with President Xi. And somewhere along the way, I think Anthony said, he said, and maybe it was Joe Biden, one of the two.
It was the Secretary of State saying that basically we don't think that Taiwan is an independent country. We think it's a part of China. And the thought is that he's signaling to China, because there's fear that China, the mainland Chinese communists, are going to attack the democratic Taiwan. That was really a dumb thing to say by Secretary Blinken, basically inferred that he was given an okay to go ahead and attack these guys. We're not going to do anything.
Yeah, it's supposed to be strategic ambiguity. Both parties, Democrat and Republican, have sort of agreed to that. Strategic ambiguity is not to say that we don't think Taiwan is independent. When I think it was Joe Biden who said not too long ago that if Taiwan was attacked, we would help defend them.
Right.
So
I was going to bring that up. He said, Biden, let's repeat that. Biden said if they're attacked, we would defend them, just like we're doing with Ukraine. So that's another huge story. I mean, if China attacks Taiwan, folks, if you haven't put that on your radar, that's going to be, everything else will be eclipsed by that. That will be huge. We would be very likely going to war with China if they
So in short, who's strong in the Republican primary? Is Trump strong on dealing with China? Is Ron DeSantis stronger? Those are the two big questions that are being asked now.
Well, and by inference, we got to say, then people would say, if we go to war with China, or if China, with the bellicose of China, policies of China, do we want to stay with an 80-year-old guy that's been, intellectually challenged, let's say?
All running up to the November 24 general presidential election.
All right. And with that, Jeff, we're going to have to close out. By folks, remember, if you like what Jeff and I are saying, let us know. Jeff, you and I maybe ought to do a special report on China. There's an awful lot there we need to get to. For now, we'll say goodbye. Jeff, you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye, folks. Come back next week.
See you.